Okay, now we've had some time to reflect upon what we know, or maybe even what we don't know about the Hispanic world, about Hispanics living in the United States, in Indiana, in the region in which you live. And it's time to move on to learning about the Hispanic world, its history, and its culture. We'll be doing that by beginning with Unit 1. In Unit 1, you'll get a great introduction to the land and the people, and then the colonization of the area that we call Latin America. We'll look at chapters 1 and 2 of your textbook, which is Latin American Interpretive History by Charlotte Burns. Now, students often remark that these chapters are really full of just lots of details, and that's true. It's a rather brief textbook to be studying about 500 plus years of a region that is made up of more than a dozen countries. So it is filled with a lot of details and a lot of information. My best advice to you while you are reading these chapters is, first, I would go at the end of every chapter. There are questions for discussion and things to think about. I would go to those before you begin reading the chapter. This will help you with thinking of ways to analyze the material that you are reading as you are going through it, rather than looking at those later and having to maybe go back and think about how you would look at those questions. Also, there are always going to be some details that are very important. For example, when in chapter 1 it's talking about the geographical diversity of the region, and it talks about particular countries that have the most diversity in terms of geography, it talks about this because that's very important. So big overriding details like that are things to look out for. So chapter 1 starts out by talking quite a bit about the geography of what we call Latin America. And students sometimes will ask, why are we studying geography if we're doing a culture class? I get history. History kind of tells us about how these people came to live the way they do now, how they developed their culture. But I will tell you that geography is a very important factor in developing human cultures. In Latin America, there is such a diversity of geography in terms of climate, in terms of mountainous regions and volcanoes and deserts and rainforest. And all of these things impact where people choose to live. They impact access to resources. And very often, they can be huge contributing factors to wealth and poverty in regions. Chapter 1 also talks about the human geography of Latin America, or the people who came to make up what we know of as Hispanics or Latin Americans. So you learn the background of the Iberian people. The Iberian people meaning those who came from the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, Portugal, and Spain. You learn about the indigenous people that existed in the region before pre-Columbian times. Pre-Columbian meaning before Columbus, before the so-called discoveries. We tend to talk of them more as encounters because it's hard to discover a region that people already inhabit. It talks about the African peoples because there was even more slaves brought in to certain areas of Latin America than there were into the United States in colonial times and post-colonial times. And then it talks about the impact of racial mixing in the region, because Latin America has had a great deal more racial mixing, especially during the colonial period, than we had in the United States. And so it has had a huge impact on the history and the culture of the region. In chapter 1, you will learn about the conquest and the colonization and the colonial period in the region that we call Latin America, or Spanish and Portuguese America. So you will hear about the conquests of the early on in the islands and then of the Aztec and Incan societies. There's a bit of information on the contrast with the Portuguese conquest of Brazil and how that differed. You will learn about how they established their colonial societies. So administration of these and how they set up their governmental structures and economic structures. How they determined your status in society and what people's status was based upon. And this was very complicated in colonial Latin America. It was based upon where you were from, what color your skin was, how wealthy you were, what your occupation was, where you lived in the colony. So this is all extremely important. And as a part of this, they talk about race and gender and economics. You will see that there is a section that talks about the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church has been extremely important in Latin America from the time of the conquest forward. It's not a new phenomenon there. So again, read the discussion chapter questions at the end of the chapter and pay attention to these things as you are reading. As a part of this unit, of course, you will take a quiz on chapter 1 and a quiz on chapter 2. These quizzes have a few multiple choice questions, and then there's a short answer essay question for each of those. I don't expect long, extensive essays. These are things that can be answered in 2 to 3 paragraphs. For supplemental resources, I have posted a couple of PowerPoints that can help to kind of put together the information you are learning. They have some ways of organizing the information and also images to go along with the learning. In that homework module for the chapter, you will see that I have posted links to primary source documents dealing with the conquest and colonization. Primary source documents are things that were written or created during the time period under study. So you will see letters, you will see accounts of the conquest. It will be those type of things you will see. And then, of course, you need to make sure that you post in the discussion forums for the unit. It will be labeled Unit 1 Discussion Forum. I have posted questions to get you started. What you need to do with these discussion forums, you need to make sure you have at least 4 postings in the forums, and these will be giving initial answers to one or more of the questions that I have posted, or interacting with and responding to what other students have posted. Now I will let you know, I say you can respond, you can ask questions. I don't consider writing a single line question really much of an interaction in the discussion. And I also would expect that if you ask a question of other students to clarify information or what they think about something, that you would go back to that forum and interact on the question you have asked. Just posting a question and moving on doesn't lead to much of a discussion. So make sure that you're interacting in these forums. This is how we are going to work with each other as a class. So again, if you have any questions, if there are more personal questions, of course, please email me, set up time to meet with me in office hours. If there are questions that you think will benefit other students, please post those questions in our general discussion forum on OnCourse. And I look forward to working with you with Unit 1.